Let me tell you about a dinner party. Not a big one, just 6 people around a table, and 5 of them were native English speakers, and I was the 6th. The conversation was flowing, everyone was laughing, and I had something to say. Something funny, actually. I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I had the words, I had the timing. And then a thought arrived, a very quiet, very powerful thought. What if it doesn't come out right? What if they look at me and think, oh, she's not that smart after all? And I said nothing. I smiled and I nodded, and I let the moment pass. And the conversation moved on, and nobody noticed, except me. I noticed, because I spent the rest of that dinner replaying the moment in my head, the thing I didn't say, the version of me that stayed quiet to stay safe. If you have ever done this, if you have ever swallowed a sentence because you were afraid of sounding stupid, this episode is for you. Welcome to Fluency with Vivi. I'm Vivi, and today we are talking about one of the deepest, most invisible fears in language learning, the fear of sounding stupid in English.
Hey everyone, I'm Robert, and I want to say something right at the start. This fear, the fear of sounding stupid, it is not about intelligence. It has nothing to do with how smart you are. Some of the most intelligent people I have ever met have been paralyzed by this exact fear. And that's actually the first thing we need to understand today.
Okay, before we get into the why, I need to finish that dinner story, because it gets worse.
Of course it does.
So, I stayed quiet the whole dinner, nodding, smiling, safe. And on the way home, my friend, who was also Brazilian, asked me, "Why were you so quiet tonight?" And I said, "I just didn't have much to say," which was a complete lie. I had so much to say. I just didn't trust myself to say it in English without sounding stupid.
And here's the painful irony of that.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
By staying quiet, by choosing safety over speaking, you actually made a smaller impression than any imperfect sentence would have.
Yes, because she was very quiet is a much more forgettable impression than she said something slightly imperfect but interesting. My silence protected nothing. It just made me invisible.
Invisible. That's exactly the right word. And I think this is what the fear of sounding stupid actually costs people. Not dignity. Because your dignity was never actually at risk. But presence, visibility, connection.
The fear makes you disappear from conversations you deserve to be in.
Exactly. So let's talk about where this fear actually comes from. Because I think understanding the root of it changes everything.
Yes, Robert, explain it to me. Where does this fear come from?
R. Okay. So the fear of sounding stupid is really made of two separate fears that got mixed together. The first fear is the fear of not being understood, which is a practical fear, a communication fear. Will they get my meaning?
V. That's a reasonable fear to have.
R. It is, and it has a practical solution. Speak clearly, use simpler words if needed, ask if they understood. Manageable. The second fear is much deeper. It's the fear of being judged as less intelligent, less capable, less worthy because of your English.
V. And that one is not about communication at all.
R. No, that one is about identity, about how you see yourself and how you believe others see you, and that fear is almost always built on a false assumption.
V. What assumption?
R. The assumption that your English level represents your intelligence level. That if your English is imperfect, people will think you are imperfect, less than, not enough.
V. And intellectually we know that's not true, but emotionally,
R. Emotionally, it feels completely true, because language is so deeply tied to how we express who we are. And when you can't fully express yourself in English, it can feel like you're showing a diminished version of yourself, like a photograph that's slightly out of focus.
V. A photograph out of focus. That's exactly what it feels like people are seeing me but not clearly.
And here's what I want to say to that. The people who matter, the people worth having in your life and in your conversations, they are not looking at the focus of the photograph. They are looking at the person in it. And the person in it is fully there. Fully intelligent. Fully interesting. Even if the English isn't perfect.
V. Okay, I want to dig into something specific. because I think the fear of sounding stupid in English has a very particular flavour for Brazilians. And I don't think we talk about this enough.
Er, tell me?
V. So, in Brazil, we grow up with a very specific relationship to public perception. Appearing capable and smart in front of others matters a lot. And English, especially in professional or social context, has become a kind of status signal. Like, if your English is good, you are educated, you are worldly, you are capable.
You are? So the stakes feel higher than just language.
Feet so much higher. Because speaking imperfect English in front of people who might know you professionally, that's not just a language mistake. It feels like a status risk, like you're revealing something about yourself that you're not ready to reveal.
And this is why the fear is so persistent, even for people who have been studying for years. It's not really about English. It's about social identity.
V, it's about who I am in the eyes of the people around me. And I'm afraid that my imperfect English will make me look like less of who I actually am.
I've And that fear, that very human, very understandable fear, is also the thing that is keeping you from becoming the person you want to be in English. Because the only way to get better is to be seen, even imperfectly.
V, even imperfectly, okay? Strategies. Let's give people something they can actually use. Strategy 1.
R. Strategy 1. Separate your English from your intelligence. These are two different things, and they live in two different places. Your intelligence is what you've built over your entire life. Your English is a skill you are currently developing. Skills can be imperfect. Skills can be in progress. That says nothing about your intelligence.
V, how do you actually do that separation, though? Because it feels like the same thing when you're in the moment.
Or here's a practical way to do it. When you feel the fear of sounding stupid arriving, ask yourself this question. Would I think this person is stupid if they were speaking Portuguese with an accent and making grammar mistakes? And the answer is almost always no. Of course not. You'd be impressed they were trying.
V, so apply the same standard to yourself that you would apply to others. R,
R. Give yourself the same generosity you automatically give to others, because you deserve it just as much.
V, strategy 2.
R. Strategy 2. Change the story you tell yourself before you speak. Right now, for many people, the internal story before speaking English is, I might say something wrong. They might judge me. I might sound stupid. That story creates fear, and fear creates the freeze. The reframe is, before you speak, tell yourself this instead. I am sharing something with another person. That is an act of courage. Whatever comes out, I showed up.
V, I showed up. That's the win, not the perfect sentence.
R. Exactly. Because showing up consistently, speaking even when it's scary, is what builds fluency over time. Not the moments where everything went perfectly, the moments where you spoke anyway.
V, I want to add something to this one because I think there's also a story we tell ourselves about native speakers. Like, they are always watching, always judging, always noticing every mistake. And that is simply not true.
R. Not even close to true. Do you want to know what native speakers are actually thinking when someone speaks imperfect English to them?
V, yes, please tell me. This I need to hear.
R. Mostly. They're thinking about what the person is saying, not how they're saying it. They're following the conversation. They're thinking about their own response. They're engaged in the human exchange. Grammar mistakes register for maybe half a second and then disappear completely.
V, half a second, and I was afraid of that half a second for years.
Most people are. And once you really internalize that, once you really believe it, something shifts. The conversation stops being a performance and starts being a conversation.
V, strategy 3.
RFI. Strategy 3. Practice being imperfect on purpose in low-stakes situations. Find a language exchange partner. Join an online English group. Leave comments on English YouTube videos. Write in English on forums about topics you love. The goal is to accumulate experiences where you spoke imperfect English, and nothing bad happened.
V, because the fear feeds on the imagination, on the worst-case scenario that we've never actually tested.
R. Exactly. The fear says, If you speak imperfect English, something terrible will happen. But when you actually do it, in a low stakes situation, you discover that the terrible thing doesn't happen. The conversation just continues, and your brain starts to update its prediction.
V, it's like exposure therapy, but for English conversations.
Arm, that's exactly what it is, and it works. Every low stakes imperfect conversation is a data point that says, this is safe. You can speak. And slowly, very slowly at first, and then quite fast, the fear gets smaller.
V, because you have evidence now, real evidence, not imagination.
Are real evidence. And evidence is more powerful than fear every single time.
V, okay, I want to close with something before the CTA, something that I think about a lot, because I spent so many years being afraid of sounding stupid in English. And looking back now, I don't regret the mistakes I made. I don't regret the imperfect sentences. I don't regret the moments when my English came out wrong and everyone understood anyway. Oh,
What do you regret?
V. The dinners where I was quiet, the meetings where I had something to say and didn't say it, the friendships that took longer to build because I kept a version of myself hidden behind the fear. Those are the things I think about. Not a single wrong word, not a single grammar mistake, the silences, the absences, the things I didn't say because I was afraid of how they would come out.
And the beautiful thing is, you can choose differently starting today.
V. Starting today. Not when your English is perfect, not when you feel ready, today. With the English you have right now, which is already, I promise you, more than enough to connect, to be heard, to be seen, and to matter in a conversation.
Your imperfect English has never made you less intelligent. It has only ever made you braver than you knew.
V. Okay, here is your challenge this week. I want you to say the thing. Whatever conversation you've been in recently where you had something to say and you didn't say it, find a version of that situation this week and say it. Imperfect, unpolished, real. Say it anyway. V. And then tell us in the comments, in English, in your own words, even if it's just one sentence, about a moment where you stayed quiet because you were afraid of sounding stupid. You don't have to be perfect, just be honest. And watch what happens when you show up in the comments the same way we're asking you to show up in conversations. Or,
We read every single comment, and if this episode helped you see this fear differently, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss next week.
V, I'm Vivi.
And I'm Robert.
V, this is Fluency with Vivi. Stop hiding, start speaking. See you next week.
Bye everyone.
V, bye.